She's signing. She's trying to tell you she's hurt." The shout of a black boy echoed through the VIP hospital ward. Doctors froze. Security rushed in. On the bed, a 9-year-old girl was writhing, her trembling hands signing frantically. Inside, bleeding, hoarse, "Help!" But no one understood, except him. It was a late autumn afternoon in Seattle. A misty drizzle blurred the glass windows of St. Mary's Children's Hospital. Inside the sterile white stillness of the VIP pediatric ward, you could hear each tick of the clock, steady, cold, and distant. At the far end of the corridor, Jaden Carter, a 17-year-old volunteer in a pale yellow vest, pushed an old floor-cleaning cart. His shoes were worn, his hands calloused, but his eyes shone with a quiet light of kindness, patience, and something deeply human. Every day he came here not just to clean floors, but to be near his grandmother, Margaret, who was battling cancer. "Cleaning floors is fine," she once said. "As long as you're near me, I feel stronger." Jaden believed her, and maybe that's why fate placed him exactly where he needed to be today. As Jaden pushed his cart past the special care ward, his gaze stopped at a small girl in a wheelchair. Around 9 years old, with flowing golden hair and skin pale as morning mist. She sat in silence, but her hands were moving. Tiny fingers fluttered through the air, rhythmic, deliberate, expressive. Jaden froze. That wasn't random motion. That was sign language. He looked around. No one noticed. A nurse walked by. A doctor bent over paperwork. No one paid attention. The girl was talking to the empty air. Jaden walked closer and knelt to meet her eyes. And from those little hands, he read each word. "My name is Chloe. I'm 9. My mom is gone. Dad thinks I'm broken. No one sees me anymore." Jaden's throat tightened. A child tried to tell the world she still existed, but no one understood. He replied in the same language, slow and gentle, as if afraid to shatter something fragile. "Hi, Chloe. I'm Jaden. I see you." In that instant, her eyes widened. A tear rolled down her cheek, trembling, honest, grateful. Her fingers began to rush almost frantically. "You really understand me? No one hears me anymore. No one believes me. Since Mom died, I can't talk, can't scream. Only my hands are still alive." Jaden nodded, and in his eyes there was something like a bridge connecting two worlds, the forgotten and the one who dared to listen. Then, the sharp sound of leather shoes. A cold voice sliced through the air like a blade. "Chloe, what are you doing here?" Ethan Hartman, a man in a sleek gray suit, walked in. His face looked weary, but his eyes radiated a sense of control. He placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder, cold enough to make Chloe flinch. "The doctor is waiting. And how many times have I told you, stop that hand-flailing nonsense? You know it bothers me." Jaden stood up. "Sir, she's using sign language. Ethan turned to him, eyes sharp as if looking at an invisible janitor. "I don't recall asking for your opinion. Please, get back to your work." He pushed the wheelchair forward. The girl turned her head, eyes wet, hands trembling as she signed quickly behind her back. Only Jaden could see. "Help me." Just 2 words, short, simple. Yet they cut straight into his heart. Jaden stood frozen in the long corridor, the fluorescent lights casting a pale glow on his bowed head. A poor boy, someone the world called invisible, had just become the only person who could hear the silent cry of a billionaire's daughter. And he didn't yet know that. 3 days later, that moment would push him to break every rule, every boundary, to save her from the death closing in. 3 days earlier, Jaden Carter's life revolved around just two things: the hospital and hope. At 17, he wasn't like the other kids in South Seattle, the ones busy with games, friends, and weekend parties. Jaden spent his mornings at school, afternoons mopping hospital floors, and nights sitting beside his grandmother's bed, reading the Bible to her in a low, soothing voice. Grandma Margaret always said, "Never let anyone make you feel small, Jaden. You don't need money to be great. You need a heart that can see what others can't." He believed her, and maybe that's why when he first saw Chloe, he recognized her in a way no one else could. From that moment on, Jaden couldn't get the little girl out of his mind. He'd quietly pass by the VIP wing during his breaks just to glance through the window. Every time, Chloe sat alone, no TV or toys, just staring out the window as if waiting for someone who would never return. Her hands kept moving, signing into the empty air, sending out distress signals that no one seemed to receive. Sometimes Jaden overheard the nurses gossiping. "That Hartman girl, poor thing, doesn't talk, doesn't smile, just stares into space. The doctor says she's got psychological trauma after her mom's death, nothing serious. Her dad's paying a fortune to fix her voice." That word, fix, made Jaden's chest tighten. A child doesn't need to be fixed. She just needs to be understood. On the second day, while mopping near the VIP corridor, Jaden accidentally overheard Ethan Hartman's voice through a half-closed door. "I don't care what the cause is. I just want her to talk again. I'll pay triple. I don't want a child who's mute." His tone was cold as steel. Chloe was signing wildly inside, trying to join the conversation with her small, desperate hands. No one looked at her. No one understood. Jaden gripped the mop handle, his heart pounding. He knew that feeling, the feeling of being unseen. As a black kid working in a wealthy hospital, people looked right through him as if he were just part of the background. And now, a rich little girl was living that same kind of loneliness. Then came the third day, a freezing morning. The hospital felt like it had stopped breathing. Jaden was mopping near the VIP ward when he heard frantic voices from room 208. "She's having another episode. Get the restraints. We can't calm her down." Jaden pressed his face to the glass, his chest tightening. Chloe lay on the bed, her face pale as paper, lips turning blue, her hands trembling as they signed over and over. "Inside. Hurts. Bleeding. Hoarse. Help." But the doctors didn't understand. A nurse held her arms down. Dr. Harris shouted, "She's agitated. Sedate her before she pulls out the IV." Jaden couldn't believe what he was seeing. The girl wasn't insane. She was trying to tell them she was dying. Then he remembered something. Yesterday, he had overheard Ethan yelling into his phone, "Cancel the equestrian event. She fell off last weekend. That's why we're not going." And suddenly, everything clicked into place like a cruel puzzle. A horse falls. 3 days ago. Internal injuries. Mute. No one understands. Jaden dropped the mop. Something deep inside him roared louder than fear itself. There was no more time. He burst through the door. Guards shouted behind him, "Hey, you can't be in here!" Jaden didn't listen. All he saw was the dying girl on the bed. "She's signing! She's trying to say she's hurt!" Everyone froze. Dr. Harris barked, "Security! Get him out now!" Jaden dropped to his knees beside Chloe's bed, took her trembling hands, and signed quickly. "Where does it hurt? Show me." The girl weakly placed her hand on her stomach, then signed, "Inside. Worse. Fell off horse. Midnight. Fence. Daddy angry. Scared." Jaden turned to the doctors, gasping for breath. "She fell off a horse 3 days ago. She's got internal injuries. She's bleeding inside. You need a CT scan, right now." No one moved. No one believed him. He shouted, voice cracking, "If you don't, she'll die right here." Chloe's body went limp, her face ghostly white, her heartbeat slowing. Dr. Harris stared at the monitor, then suddenly yelled, "Get a CT, now! Go, go, go!" Jaden stayed beside her, gripping her hand tightly. Chloe opened her eyes one last time, signing slowly, weakly. "See me, please, see me." Jaden bent down, tears falling onto her hand, and signed back, "I see you. You're not alone." 4 hours later, inside the brightly lit operating room, everything moved like a frantic symphony. The metallic clash of scalpels, the murmurs of surgeons, the faint, fragile rhythm of a heartbeat on the monitor. Out in the hallway, Jaden stood still. His hands were still trembling, his shirt stained with dry blood. He wasn't family. No one was obligated to tell him anything, but he stayed, as if his very soul had been locked inside that room. Dr. Harris stepped out when the door finally opened, sweat beading on his forehead. The arrogance in his eyes was gone for the first time, replaced by shock and guilt. He spoke softly. "You were right. She was bleeding internally. A ruptured spleen, 3 days old. If we'd waited even an hour longer, we would have lost her." Jaden nodded, tears spilling down his cheeks. Not because he was proven right, but because the little girl had been saved. But that was only the beginning. When the doctors examined Chloe further, they found something worse. Old scars around her ribs, a healed fracture in her arm, and signs of prolonged eye trauma. Dr. Harris frowned as he flipped through the chart, then turned to Ethan Hartman. "Mr. Hartman, has your daughter fallen before? We're seeing multiple old injuries." Ethan froze, his hands clenched. "She's clumsy, always bumping into things. I thought it was fear." The doctor's voice was calm but firm. "No, sir, not fear. Blindness." Chloe awoke. Her eyes blinked weakly, clouded and dull. Her trembling hands began to sign one slow word at a time. Not clumsy, just can't see clearly. Everything blurry. Jaden stood by her bed, speechless. Dr. Harris immediately ordered an eye test. When the results came back, silence fell across the entire room. Chloe's vision had deteriorated to 30%. For months, she had been seeing the world through a fog and couldn't tell anyone because her voice was gone. Ethan sank into a chair. The man who once commanded a tech empire now sat with trembling hands, staring at his little girl. Then at Jaden, the black teenager in a worn yellow volunteer vest whose calm, steady eyes held more truth than any words could. Ethan's voice cracked. I didn't see anything. All this time I only looked at what I wanted to fix, never at who she really was." Jaden stayed silent. No judgment, only understanding. deep, quiet, human. He signed slowly, his hands strong yet gentle. She doesn't need to be fixed. She just needs to be understood. Ethan watched those hands move, then broke down in tears. For the first time, he wasn't the confident millionaire, not the man who could control everything. He was just a father who had wasted too much time learning to love his child correctly. Chloe stirred softly. Her fragile hands began to move, shaky, deliberate, as if relearning her own language. "Daddy? See me?" Ethan took her hands, tears falling onto them, and answered with both his voice and his trembling fingers. "Yes, sweetheart. I see you now." No one in that room said another word. Only silence remained. But it was no longer the kind of silence born of fear or pain. It was the silence of understanding, of love, of two souls who had finally found a way to speak to each other without needing words at all. In the days following the surgery, Chloe's room no longer felt cold. The light grew softer, and for the first time in months, people heard something new. Laughter. Not loud, not clear, but real. Warm and quiet, like the first breath of life returning. Chloe still couldn't speak, but she began to express herself again, and her first teacher was Jaden Carter. Every afternoon after school, Jaden would stop by her room. He carried a few small notebooks, some flashcards with illustrated hand signs, and that patient, gentle smile that even the sternest nurses couldn't resist. He would sit beside her bed and sigh softly. "Today we'll learn something new." Chloe's eyes would light up, her frail hands rising to follow his lead. Together they practiced words: father, daughter, understand, love, sorry. Simple words, yet powerful enough to still the man watching quietly from the corner. Ethan Hartman, the father, had spent years buried in contracts and stock reports. At first he said nothing, he just watched in silence. But each day Jaden came, Ethan stayed a little longer, until one day he stepped forward, scratching his head awkwardly like a boy. "Jaden, could you teach me too? I don't want to be an outsider anymore." Jaden smiled. "Of course, Mr. Hartman, but it's not easy. You have to listen with your eyes and speak with your heart." Ethan nodded, his eyes glistening. "That's exactly what I've forgotten to do all my life." Day by day, something extraordinary happened. The more Ethan signed, the more he found himself able to speak, not with words, but with feelings. Simple phrases: "Have you eaten? I'm sorry. I miss you." Things he once thought unnecessary now flowed from his hands, minor signs carrying the weight of love he'd never expressed. And Chloe began to bloom like a wilted flower, finding the sun again. She smiled more, her eyes shone brighter, and sometimes, instead of only signing, she began to make sounds. The first were hoarse, faint whispers, barely audible, but Jaden recognized them instantly. They were her voice. One afternoon, as Jaden was teaching her the sign for thank you, Chloe suddenly parted her lips, her voice trembling. "Th-you." Jaden froze, tears spilling down his cheeks. Ethan dropped his phone to the floor, covering his mouth in disbelief. The whole room fell silent, until the silence broke into tears, laughter, and joy. Chloe looked at them, signing and speaking together, still weak but radiant. "Happy? Daddy? Happy?" Ethan stepped forward, kneeling by her bed, gripping her tiny hands. "Happy, sweetheart. So happy." Jaden turned away, quietly wiping his eyes. He didn't want anyone to see, but inside he felt a quiet, overwhelming joy. The joy of witnessing a miracle he once only dared to believe in. In the following weeks, the whole hospital talked about the miracle girl from the Hartman family. But no one truly knew what the miracle was. It wasn't that Chloe spoke again. It was that a father had finally learned how to be silent, so he could genuinely listen to his child. Every night after Jaden left the hospital, Ethan stayed by his daughter's side. No phone, no laptop, no meetings. Just the two of them, their hands moving gently beneath the soft glow of the bedside lamp. A new language. The language of love. News of the little girl who couldn't speak but made an entire hospital listen spread across Seattle. People talked about miracles, about medical wonders, but no one knew that a quiet promise was shared by 3 souls behind it all. Jaden still came every day after school. Chloe greeted him with a smile, her small hands already poised to sign. And Ethan, the father who once feared his own daughter's language, had now become the quickest learner, the most patient student, and a changed man. As Jaden prepared to leave one afternoon, Ethan called out to him. His voice was low but sincere. "Jaden, I don't know what else to say except 2 words. Thank you." Jaden smiled. "You don't need to thank me, Mr. Hartman. Just keep your promise." "Promise?" "That you'll never mistake silence for emptiness. You'll see her, not as someone broken, but as something beautiful, exactly as she is." Ethan nodded, eyes glistening. "I promise." A few weeks later, Ethan received a phone call that froze his blood. The riding school where Chloe had taken lessons issued an apology. A staff member confessed that the fence she fell against had been reported as dangerous for months, but they'd ignored it, for fear of losing VIP clients. Ethan's grip on the phone tightened, his voice rising like a storm. "You knew it was unsafe, and you still let the kids ride there?" He wanted to sue, to shut the place down, to repay every ounce of pain his daughter had suffered. But when he entered her hospital room, his anger dissolved in an instant. Chloe sat there, fragile but radiant, her hands moving softly. "Don't punish. Fix." Ethan froze. "What do you mean, Chloe?" "Make it safe. For other kids." The father bowed his head. In front of him was no longer a weak child, but a soul strong enough to turn her pain into change for others. A week later, Ethan held a press conference at the hospital. Reporters packed the room, cameras flashing. Beside him stood Jaden Carter, the teenage volunteer in his worn yellow vest, and Chloe, the 9-year-old girl once labeled a medical problem. Ethan began, his voice trembling but clear. "My daughter nearly died, not because of illness, but because no one listened. She'd been speaking to us all along. We just didn't understand her language." He turned to Jaden. "This young man, a volunteer with no degrees or titles, did what dozens of doctors, specialists, and even I, her father, could not. He listened." The room fell silent. Ethan drew a deep breath and continued. "Starting today, I'm founding the Chloe Hartman Foundation for Communication Access. Its goal is to train every school, hospital, and medical center in Washington state in sign language." He paused, looking at his daughter, then at Jaden. "This is my promise, that no child will ever die in silence again." A reporter turned to Jaden. "Jaden, would you like a scholarship or any kind of reward?" He looked at them, then at Ethan, and said quietly, words that made the entire room hold its breath. I don't need money. I just need the promise kept, that you'll teach your daughter that silence doesn't mean weakness, and that you'll see her every day. The room erupted in applause, not for a millionaire, not for a miracle, but for a boy who turned empathy into action. Ethan stepped forward, placing a hand on Jaden's shoulder and whispered, "You saved my daughter, but more than that, you saved me." Jaden smiled gently. "No, sir. I just helped you hear your own heart again." That night in the quiet hospital room, Chloe signed to Jaden, "You saved me." He smiled, signing back, "No, you saved yourself." Then, slowly, one sign at a time, he added, "Because you had something no one could ever take away. Courage." Chloe smiled, a soft, pure smile. And for the first time in a year, she laughed, fully, freely, her laughter ringing through the small hospital room like light itself. 3 years after that fateful day, Seattle had changed. Not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly. In hospital hallways, in classrooms, people began to notice something new. Hands signing. In a small classroom at Madison Public School, Chloe Hartman, now 12 years old, stood before a whiteboard. Her hands moved gracefully, almost like a dance, her voice clear and confident. "The word friend goes like this," she said, signing as she spoke. 2 fingers gently hooking together. Because friends are meant to hold on, not to forget. Below her, more than 20 children were learning, laughing and singing along. Some wore hearing aids, some could not speak, and some were perfectly typical. But in that room, no one was different. At the back of the class sat a middle-aged man, silent, eyes glistening. Ethan Hartman, her father. The man who once failed to understand his own daughter was now the sponsor of Sign for Every Child, a statewide program training thousands of teachers, nurses, and students in sign language. After Chloe's recovery, Ethan had turned his promise into purpose. He sold half his company shares, founded the Chloe Hartman Foundation for Communication Access, and donated all profits from his medical ventures to build systems supporting children without voices. Now, in every major hospital across Washington, a message gleamed on the directory boards. "If you can't speak, we will still hear you." And what about Jaden Carter? The boy who once pushed a mop down the hospital halls was now a final-year medical student. Every morning, people still saw him at St. Mary's Hospital, this time in a white doctor's coat, his nameplate shining softly. Jaden Carter, MD. Pediatric Care and Nonverbal Communication Specialist. One afternoon, in the hospital garden, Jaden met Ethan again. The once stern father now looked older, calmer, and full of warmth. "Jaden," Ethan said quietly, "you know, I used to think I could buy anything. Now I understand. Some things can only be earned through empathy. You taught me that." Jaden smiled, eyes gentle. "I didn't teach you, sir. I just helped you see what you already had. A heart that loved your child." Ethan said nothing for a while. Then his voice broke softly. "You're going to be an incredible doctor, Jaden. Not because you save lives, but because you hear people, even when they can't speak." When Ethan walked away, Jaden's eyes followed him, to where Chloe was teaching a group of children in the garden how to sign the word hope. Her small hands traced a circular motion through the air, light, gentle, and graceful. A girl who once lived silently was now teaching the world to speak with her heart. Jaden whispered to himself, "Sometimes the most powerful language is the one that doesn't make a sound." Years later, the press would call the movement the Hartman-Carter effect. Hospitals across America began implementing mandatory sign language training. Mute children, those with communication disorders or trauma, were no longer labeled as stubborn or difficult. They were listened to, with eyes, with patience, with humanity. And inside St. Mary's Hospital, on the white wall by the entrance to the pediatric ward, hung a polished brass plaque that read, "The Jaden Carter Center for Nonverbal Patient Care, in memory of all the children who were never heard, in honor of those who taught us how to listen." Just below, someone had written in marker, "A poor boy taught a rich world how to care. A boy once unseen taught the world how to listen." 8 years had passed since that fateful press conference. The world had changed, quietly, without spectacle, steadily, like the slow, enduring breath of compassion spreading through hospitals, classrooms, and hearts. At 25, Jaden Carter was now a pediatrician, working at the very hospital where he once mopped floors. People called him the doctor who listens with his heart, not because of fame or skill, but because everyone who met him walked away with the same feeling. I was seen. I was understood. One crisp autumn morning, as Jaden was finishing a case file, a gentle knock came at the door. Standing there was Chloe Hartman, now 17. Her eyes were brighter, and her smile was still gentle, but now touched with the confidence of a young woman. Beside her was a little boy about 6, with messy brown hair and wide, fearful eyes. He hid behind Chloe, his small hands moving restlessly in the air. Chloe signed softly. "He doesn't speak. I think he's trying to say something, but no one understands." Jaden crouched down, smiling warmly. His hands moved slowly, calm and open. "I see you. You're safe. What do you want to tell me?" The boy froze. Then his eyes lit up as if someone had just opened the world for him. His little hands began to move quickly, trembling, desperate. The urgency not of panic, but of a soul finally being heard. Jaden understood. Every sign, every expression, every breath. The boy told him about an accident, how he'd stopped speaking afterward, how someone had once told him, "You're bad. Be quiet." Jaden nodded softly. "You've already been so brave," he said. And then the boy began to cry, collapsing into Chloe's arms. She held him, tears and laughter mingling, because she knew. 8 years ago she had been that child, the one screaming in silence, wishing anyone would just understand. When calm returned, Chloe turned to Jaden. Her voice, steady and rich now, filled the room. "Do you remember? 8 years ago, I signed the same way. I was scared too, and wanted someone to see me." Jaden smiled. "I remember. And I remember you taught me the most significant life lesson." "What lesson?" she asked. "That to save someone, you don't always need a degree. Just a heart quiet enough to hear what isn't being said." Chloe's eyes softened. "I think the world's better because of people like you, Jaden." He shook his head, smiling gently. "No, Chloe. The world's better because of people like you. The ones who turn pain into light and teach others to understand through love." That afternoon, they walked together through the hospital corridor. The rain had stopped. Sunlight streamed through the tall glass windows, casting a golden glow across the floors. On the wall of the newly built children's wing hung a polished bronze plaque, the Jaden Carter Center for Nonverbal Patient Care, in honor of those who taught us how to listen. And just below it, someone had scrawled in black marker, "A poor boy saved a rich girl, not with money, but with empathy." Jaden looked at the words and smiled. He turned to Chloe. "Do you ever think back to that day?" She nodded, her eyes calm and deep. "I do. And I've realized silence is never empty. If you know how to listen, silence is one of the most important things." Jaden's smile deepened, pride glinting in his eyes. "You're right. Your silence, back then, taught the whole world how to listen." As Chloe walked away, Jaden stayed by the window for a long time. Outside, children in the rehabilitation garden were practicing sign language, their small hands flickering in the air like rays of light. Each gesture, each movement, was proof that understanding can spread, that empathy, once awakened, never dies. He closed his eyes, and in that moment of quiet, Jaden realized every pain, every loss, every sacrifice had meant something, because it hadn't just saved one girl. It had saved the way humanity learns to understand one another. Years later, America had changed, not through a law or a grand declaration, but through ordinary people who learned to see the extraordinary in someone else's silence. Hospitals across the country began training staff in sign language. Schools now had interpreters for mute, deaf, and withdrawn children. Children were no longer called problems. Their names called them. In a large building in downtown Seattle, within the campus of the Jaden Carter Center, there was a small room called the Sophia Room. It was a place where children who could not speak were taught to express their emotions through hands and eyes, and where adults came to learn again how to listen with their hearts. On the plaque by the door, a simple line was engraved. "Every silence has a story. You just have to listen long enough." That morning, as Jaden walked down the corridor, he saw a little girl practicing her signs with a nurse. She turned, smiled at him, her eyes bright like dawn. Jaden nodded, smiling back, and continued on his way, a quiet warmth rising in his chest, the feeling that every struggle and sacrifice had become a seed that would live on. That evening, as Jaden ended his shift, he exited the hospital balcony. The sunset stretched across the Seattle skyline, painting the city in gold. And in that golden light, Jaden thought of everything. Of the little girl who once screamed in silence. Of the father who had forgotten how to love through words. And of himself, the janitor boy who once mopped hospital floors. Now, we are teaching the world that listening can save a life. He whispered, his voice low but steady. Sometimes, the only thing we need to save someone. Stop, look at them, and say, "I see you. I hear you. You matter." His words lingered, silent yet powerful, like the heartbeat of a world learning to understand again. And that, it was how a poor boy taught America that silence is not emptiness. It is a language, the language of courage, of patience, of love, the language of every forgotten soul, waiting for someone willing to see, to hear, and to care. Not everyone who speaks is truly heard. Sometimes, The quietest people carry entire worlds inside their hearts. And when we truly listen, that is when humanity begins to heal. This is Deep Life Tales, where every story is a lesson in kindness. If you believe that understanding can change the world, comment, share this story, and help us spread the quiet power of compassion. Because sometimes, one small act of yours might be the only thing someone out there needs to keep going. The Deep Life Tales logo fades in, soft music swells, and on the screen, in the glow of the sunset, appear the final words. Because sometimes, the quietest stories speak the loudest.